And for more analysis, let's bring in Amit Tendu-Palit, Senior Research Fellow and Research Lead Institute of South Asian Studies, speaking to us from Singapore, and Aina Tenjin, Senior Fellow of Taihe Institute, Chairman and Asian Narratives in Beijing. Well, welcome you both. Let's start with an overview of the Maldives' strategic importance in the Indian Ocean region. And Amit, how would you characterize the Maldives' position in the context of India-China rivalry?
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Natalie. I think Maldives has over time become a very specific strategic variable in the entire Indian Ocean context. And this has increased particularly after the growth of the concept of the Indo-Pacific, which basically brings the confluence of the Indian and the Pacific Oceans together. Now, Maldives is a very small country in terms of its geographic size. But what increases its strategic significance is the fact that it is very close to the major shipping routes that pass through the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean and connect the shipping that travels from one particular part of Asia to another part of Asia and further onwards onto Europe, and then probably to other parts of the world. So as a result of this particular strategic presence, Maldives becomes a country which can, if that factor is allowed to prevail, can actually become a country which can give certain major powers or middle powers or ambitious powers the opportunity to somehow have an influence over the shipping lanes and maritime traffic across these two parts of Asia. So that is precisely where Maldives is drawing its significance, somewhat similar to other smaller island economies in the region. Sri Lanka is an example. We have also had examples of Seychelles and Mauritius, who have increasingly begun commanding that strategic prominence.
So, Aina, walk us through what are China's key interests in the Maldives, and how does it plan to maintain its influence in the country?
Well, I'll tell you, I think it's wrong to say that they're trying to influence. They'd like to see it remain neutral. Now, obviously, this is an area where India has had diplomatic sway, or at least a tremendous amount of influence over many, many years. So the problems between the Maldives and India, although they're not structural, but Maldives is in fact a Islamic country. And, sometimes they do not take issues involving religion, too lightly. For instance, they have ended their relations basically with Israel over Gaza. It's very clear. They also have a lot of issues. I mean, it's a very it's the lowest lying country in the world, and is very, very affected by any kind of climate change. Rising waters could literally put the whole island nation under water and, in essence, end it. This idea that it's some sort of military pawn is, I think, overstated. They don't have an army or anything of that sort. They couldn't project power. They would have to turn to somebody else. And I don't think either Washington, India, or China would want that. It's been the U.S. Who has been, looking for more bases in addition to the 400 that they have, expanding into Oceania, in essence, kind of tightening the noose around China. Because when you start talking about trade, what we're really talking about is China. China depends on that area for the oil that's coming from the Middle East. It also depends on that area for value-added goods that have been produced in China and are going out to other destinations. So the Maldives have very wisely decided that they're going to be non-aligned. The first trip was to China. He's definitely paying attention to India in terms of attending the inauguration of Modi, and he just finished a trip to Washington, D.C. This is not alignment. This is simply just saying we will not be taken for granted, and we will accept any help that we can get, especially given some of the issues that they have.
Amit, is that something that you'd agree with Aina in terms of China's key interest in the Maldives? Because some will say that whatever it is, Maldives seems to be drifting away from India and towards China. So what factors do you think have contributed to that?
Look, I think it's very clear that the current president came to power on an India out campaign, lesser engagement with India. And this, by the way, happened well before the trouble broke out between Israel and Palestine. So I don't really think the question of religion really matters out here, because if you look at India parallelly, it has close relations with several Islamic countries at this point of time, including the Emirates and Saudi Arabia. So I don't think that's a point. I think it began with the Maldives taking a clear position on its strategic alignment. And that alignment was to bring it closer to China. The calculations were, of course, that it would benefit from that closer alignment. But over time, over the 7 or 8 months that have subsequently passed, I think this realization has started making clear that there are downsides to that excessive proximity to China, which is very clear from not just a strategic and political perspective, but also from the point that there are problems that the Maldives have begun facing. The IMF report has made it very clear that the external debt dependency essentially arising out of a large exposure to Chinese infrastructure investments in the country, much of which has not really started producing returns, is a problem, including the fact that Maldives might be beginning to start a free trade agreement with China, which is heavily one-sided, taking away a lot of customs duties, which are a main source of revenue for the Maldives government themselves. So I think there is a realization on part of Maldives right now over the last 2 to 3 months that it's important to hedge. It's important to stay as balanced as possible within the competing strategic interests in the region and accordingly maximize the opportunities that come in the way.
So I know we know that there has been IMF warning on debt distress, also Fitch's ratings downgrade on the Maldives economy. How do you think? What are some of the implications of all these warnings, and obviously the impact on the Maldives economy, and also the sort of decisions its foreign policy will have to make?
Well, I mean, these are not new warnings. It seems anywhere China goes with its Belt and Road Initiative, there are cries that there's some sort of, a desire to bankrupt these countries with debt. The fact is, China's only 20% of the debt, and they have been providing a very important infrastructure that was not provided by the United States, which only put in a embassy last year, or India, for that matter. So while I can completely understand the friction that comes when you have an expanding trade footprint with China and historical areas of influence with India, these are issues they have. But what is China trying to do? Are they trying to move troops in there? Are they trying to create a base there? No. They simply want to help with many of the problems, including energy. They have invested quite a bit into renewables. They believe that they have to expand their economy, which is heavily dependent not on duties coming from Chinese products or being sold outside, but from tourism. And China is a huge basket for tourism. They can upgrade their the facilities. They're already rushing to finish the airport. This could be very important to the island economy. As I said, was almost 90% of government revenues come from tourism. So it's a very, very important part of it, and it's part of their strategy to survive.
And Amit, do you see China's increasing influence in the Maldives as an example of debt threat diplomacy?
Look, Natali, let me put it this way, that there are obviously downsides to Chinese investment-driven infrastructure activities, and we have seen those. We have seen those in Sri Lanka, for example. We have seen those in parts of Africa. Now, the question over here is that if Maldives is going to make a choice with respect to China being the main source of capital and infrastructure funding, then obviously Maldives is doing so in the light of the knowledge that there are issues concerned with that kind of Chinese investment. The problem over there is that Maldives remains a very small economy, and there are only two sources from which it draws its revenue. The first of it is tourism revenues. The second is customs duties. Now, if it gets into a very active trade framework-based relationship with China through a free trade agreement, for example, what means is that the customs duties go, so that source of collection goes, and then it has to rely totally on tourism for fetching whatever revenues that it wants. And tourism is not an entirely sustainable proposition, because while there could be tourist flows coming from one part of the world, it's important for Maldives to ensure that that heavy dependence on tourism does not divert away tourists from other countries through a particular reliance on that particular source of tourists. So I think this is something which Maldives needs to be careful about. I also would incline to the view that Maldives is beginning to take note of the fact that a more balanced approach is statistically, strategically, and economically feasible, and it's perhaps going to stay committed to that.
That's a great discussion there. Thank you so very much for your time and thoughts. Amit Tendu-Palit speaking to us from Singapore, and Aina Tenjin in Beijing. Thanks so very much, gentlemen.